Australians, colloquially referred to as Aussies, are the citizens, nationals and individuals associated with the country of Australia. Between 1788 and the Second World War, the vast majority of settlers and immigrants came from the British Isles. Although there was significant immigration from China and Germany during the 19th century. Many early British settlements were penal colonies to house transported convicts. Immigration of free settlers increased exponentially from the 1850s. Following a series of gold rushes. In the decades immediately following the Second World War, Australia received a large wave of immigration from across Europe, with many more immigrants arriving from southern and eastern Europe than in previous decades. Since the end of the White Australia policy in 1973, Australia has pursued an official policy of multiculturalism and has the world's 8th largest immigrant population, with immigrants accounting for 30% of the population in 2019. A large and continuing wave of immigration to Australia from across the world has continued into the 21st century, with Asia now being the largest source of immigrants. A smaller proportion are descended from Australia's indigenous peoples, comprising Aboriginal Australians, Aboriginal Tasmanians and Torres Strait Islanders. The development of a separate Australian identity and national character began in the 19th century, linked with the anti-transportation and nativist movements and the Eureka Rebellion during the colonial period and culminated in the Federation of the Australian Colonies in 1901. The primary languages Australian English and Australian culture and literature have historically developed from Anglo-Celtic and Western traditions. The majority of Australians or their ancestors immigrated within the past 4 centuries, with the exception of the indigenous population and others from outlying islands who became Australian through expansion of the country. Despite its multi-ethnic composition, the culture of Australia held in common by most Australians can also be referred to as mainstream Australian culture, a Western culture largely derived from the traditions of British and Irish colonists, settlers, and immigrants. The colony of New South Wales was established by the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1788. With the arrival of the First Fleet, and 5 other colonies were established in the early 19th century, now forming the 6 present-day Australian states. Large-scale immigration occurred after the First and Second World Wars, with many post-World War II migrants coming from southern and eastern Europe introducing a variety of elements. Immigration from the Middle East, South and East Asia, Pacific Islands, Africa, and Latin America has also been having an impact. The predominance of the English language, the existence of a democratic system of government drawing upon the British traditions of the Westminster system of government, parliamentarianism and constitutional monarchy, American constitutionalist and federalist traditions, Christianity as the dominant religion, and the popularity of sports originating in the British Isles, are all evidence of a significant Anglo-Celtic heritage. Australian culture has diverged significantly since British settlement. Sporting teams representing the whole of Australia have been in existence since the 1870s. Australians are referred to as Aussie, and are maybe referred to as Antipodean by those in the Northern Hemisphere. Prior to the introduction of Australian citizenship, Australians had the status of British subjects. As a result of many shared linguistic, historical, cultural and geographic characteristics, Australians have often identified closely with New Zealanders in particular. Furthermore, elements of indigenous, American, British, and more recent immigrant customs, languages, and religions have also combined to form the modern Australian culture. In the 2016 Australian census, the most commonly nominated ancestries were. Today, Australians of European descent are the majority in Australia, estimated at approximately 76% of the total population in 2016. Historically, European immigrants had great influence over Australian history and society, which resulted in the perception of Australia as a Western country. Since soon after the beginning of British settlement in 1788, people of European descent have formed the majority of the population in Australia. Although some observers stress Australia's convict history, the vast majority of early settlers came of their own free will. Far more Australians are descended from assisted immigrants than from convicts, the majority being British and Irish. About 20% of Australians are descendants of convicts. Most of the first Australian settlers came from London, the Midlands and the north of England and Ireland. Settlers that arrived throughout the 19th century were from all parts of the United Kingdom and Ireland. A Sig.